Thank you very much. It's always good to come here. Feels like I've probably been here as much as anywhere in the UK since we moved back, I think. At least twice a year for Wednesday Transforming Essex. And who's never heard me been here when I've been here before? Has anyone? You're all old friends or young friends. You haven't heard me. Oh, you're in trouble then. Yeah, it's always just good to be here. Now, for some reason, I was drawn to you three over here this morning. Are you friends? Well, you are now. You are now. Sorry. Okay. All right. I just felt like there's something on your life to do, and you're your worst enemy. You're your worst critic. You're just like me, but on this subject, not in every area of life. There's a theology inside of you. There's an understanding of God inside of you that is about to get released. And it's not what people normally would expect that to mean. Theology doesn't mean you have to go to college and do all the academic stuff. It's the way you know God. And you have an awareness and a knowledge of God. And it causes you to hear lyrics as you walk around the countryside. And he likes it. And what's about to happen is they're about to become short notes that you send to people. You're not going to write a book, is what I think I'm trying to say, but it's almost as though you could send me a text with some lyrics, these notes, and the impact of that on somebody's life is more life-changing than a book. And you do it all the time, and it's the way you live, and he just wants you to know he likes it, and it's true theology. It's the real thing because it's helping people to know God in a way that is accessible. And I don't know whether you like secular music. I almost see you with vinyl. That may or may not be true. I have a little bit of vinyl in my life. But I felt like the Lord is going to bring to life some old lyrics from way back in time, from records that you like. And anyway, he likes you. He just likes the way you do life. So, and I for some reason, you two over here, there's a normality to your Christianity that people are jealous of, and you're about to get surprised. I don't know exactly what the detail of this would be, but it feels to me as though you're going to get to do some things that you've always thought what other people got to do. Even it might not be this, but trips. Going on a mission trip somewhere or doing something like that, and you've always thought, someone else gets to do that, and it's never been available for you. But I felt like the Lord said He's going to open up some things because there's something about the normality of the way you do Christianity that people are jealous of. They want to know how you do that. They want to know how you can walk into a situation almost like casually with your hands in your pockets. No fanfare, no razzmatazz, but you change an environment. And I told you I was drawn to you three over here. I don't know whether this is you, where this would fit, but I saw almost like what do they call them? A disruptor thing on you. That you, what do they call it? Disruptive technology, is that right? Is that right? It's not quite that, but it's disruptive in charity terms. It's disruptive. It's going to disrupt a way that things have been done, and you're going to bring something for the kingdom in a kind of a charity kind of not-for-profit kind of world where you bring something which changes the way people think and care for people. And I'm not exactly sure what it is, but there's something on you because you have a very strong pastor anointing on you. And you can't help yourself. You walk down roads and high streets and you see people's needs, but the Lord's going to open up something that you will do. There may even be money, resources. There may be money and resources coming for both of you because He's going to need some money to go on these trips. But there's something going on. And there's a real beauty about the two of you, a real simple, consistent, people can trust you, people know where they stand with you. When they get around you, they feel safe. All right. You've been Andy Cannon, haven't you? You've got one of his shirts on there. He gets everywhere, that guy. I was just with him last week. He's one of my favorite people to be with. He always makes me laugh, apart from everything else. Yeah. I'm not sure whether that's going to stay on there with the lid off. But okay. Well, I woke up this morning, and I have a theme that I've been talking about for a little while. Not very long, but just a theme that has been sort of developing as I've been reading the Word. And initially, I didn't think I was meant to share it, because when I got up this morning, I asked the Lord what he wanted me to say to you, and he told me something to say to you, so I'm going to say that. But then I came in and realized that it was communion, and communion is kind of one of the 5 points of this theme that I've been just thinking through. And then Rob started reading 1 Corinthians 13, and I thought, oh, well, I guess I know where I'm going to go then. So, but the first thing I want to say to you is I felt like the Lord just wanted me to say, well done. That's it. But you know what? That's pretty profound. What he wanted me to say was, well done for being you. Well done for carrying an identity in this community. Well done for what you've built as a church. Well done for the vision that you have. Well done for the heart that you have for the community. Well done for the worship. Well done for the way that there are always young people in this church. Well done that this is a multicultural church. Well done. And I got this really strong sense that he was really looking down and saying, well done. Just well done. Because I had another theme that I was kind of like, felt like I was going to speak into. And he started, I'm very drawn to Paul at the moment and the letters of Paul. And I was writing a letter recently myself, a difficult letter. And I was probably a little bit angry, if I'm being honest, okay? As I was writing it, I was a little bit mad. And I felt myself saying, how would Paul write? What would he write at the beginning? And I felt like for you, if he was to write you a letter right now, the first line he would write would be, well done. Well done. Well done. That when I come here, there's a consistency of the preaching of the gospel, of valuing the presence of God, of loving each other, of pursuing the impossible, of believing. You're in Miracle House, so you believe for big stuff. And I felt like what he wanted to say to you was, well done. Is that okay? Well done. Just well done. That's 2-word prophetic word, but it's a good one. Yeah, you should. Apart from that winning thing that you've got on you. We go, yeah. I mean, I'm not sure whether it goes with your team either. That's the problem. Although they did well yesterday. They got a couple in yesterday, so that was good. But yeah. So here's where I want to go. Let me just grab hold of this, and then I'm going to need to ask my wife what it is she says. But that happens to me a lot. My wife has these little profound things that she says, and then I try and repeat them. She says, you didn't say it quite right. What is it you say? It's really hard to hold communion in your hands. Did you hear that? It's really difficult to take communion with somebody you're in conflict with, you're in disagreement with. Why am I starting there? Well, because I think what we often think is that Paul, when he was writing to the Corinthians, was writing a textbook for a church. Like, you know, he got to chapter 11, I think it is, and he thought, well, we better deal with communion here. He didn't. He was addressing the issues of the day. When he got to 1 Corinthians 13, which wasn't written that way anyway, it wasn't like, oh, I think I better tell them something about love. So he wrote a chapter on love, and he thought, well, they probably need something to read at weddings anyway, so it'll be useful. And you see, and I love that you had young people came up, and I love that you read the scripture about communion, because we can so easily miss it. But you know, I was somewhere a little while ago, and they rattled it off in such a way. I'm like, did you stop for a minute and realize what you're actually saying? You see, when Paul wrote this, he said, I received from the Lord that which also I give unto you, that on the night Jesus was betrayed. I think sometimes we think that was a scene setter for the opening chapter of a Charles Dickens book. Let's just get the time, date, and place. It was the night Jesus was betrayed. No, what he's doing is he's addressing the culture. He's saying, if you think you have an excuse, if you think you can be justified in holding bread and wine with people you don't agree with, you got something seriously wrong, because Jesus, on the worst night of his life, when one of the 12 that he'd walked with was about to betray him, he took bread, he took wine, he broke it, he gave thanks. So you are without excuse. Why do I start there? Because I'm absolutely convinced, without any shadow of a doubt, that what Paul wrote to the Corinthians we need today. And we need it today because Paul is writing to exactly the same circumstances that we live in today. And you'll go, no, it's really a different world. No, it's not. Gordon Fee, one of the great theologians of Corinthians, he's written his book that he wrote on 1 Corinthians. He said this. He said that Corinthians was at one and the same time Los Angeles, Las Vegas, and New York. That's what he's writing into. Let me just give you a little list. I'm not going to speak from here, but let me just give you a list that I've been working on that I haven't finished yet, but I've been working on it. Because the age in which we live, Paul wrote to. See, I hear people, they go, oh, it's different. We need to read the Bible through a different lens. We need to look at it differently. We need to understand that when it was written, when they wrote this, they didn't really mean this. No, it's all in here. And I'm going to give you 5 problems, and I'm going to give you 5 solutions from Corinthians. And they're 5 things you already do, which is why I started with well done. Is that okay? But just listen to this for a minute. This isn't all from Corinthians. 2 Peter 1:16, he talks about we didn't follow cleverly devised tales. 2 Timothy 4:3, people who want to have their ears tickled. 2 Timothy 2:23, refuse foolish and ignorant speculations. 2 Timothy 2:16, avoid worldly and empty chatter. 2 Timothy 2:14, don't wrangle about words. 2 Timothy 3:9, shun foolish controversies and genealogies. 1 Corinthians 4:20, the kingdom does not exist in words but in power. 1 Corinthians 1:17, not in cleverness of speech. 2 Timothy 3:7, always learning. It's one of my favorites. Always learning and never coming to the knowledge of the truth. Why have I given you that list? Because if ever there was an age where we are being drowned by words, speculations, arguments, it is now. Isn't it? And the whole Bible addresses this. And so I'm just going to run through 5 things with you, I think. Maybe. Is that all right? Are you ready? I'm going to hit you pretty hard and pretty fast. What I've noticed about Paul is that there are a lot of verses that are kind of famous. If you regularly read the Bible or you regularly go to church, you will find that there are these verses. They're like the famous verses, and they jump out at you, or they're used often. And what I've started to notice is the context. I've started to notice the context because it's like 1 Corinthians 13. That it wasn't, Paul wasn't answering an exam paper in college where it's like, write down a few thoughts you have about love. He's addressing a problem of the age. The biggest problem in Corinth was a false view of spirituality. There was a boasting and a bragging about their spirituality. And Paul's basically saying, I don't care what of that list you're able to do. If you don't have love, forget it. He's addressing it. He's addressing boasting. So everywhere that we read, as it were, these famous passages or famous verses of Paul, there's a reason. Let me give you this one. 1 Corinthians chapter 2 and verses, let's do 2, 3, 4. For I determined to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. And I was with you in weakness and in fear. It's hard to imagine Paul in weakness and in fear, isn't it? But he was. He was often found himself in that place and in much trembling. Why? Because there was so much opposition. There was so much that came against him. Well, it's not surprising. He's the terrorist of the day. He was the terrorist. He was the Saddam Hussein or anyone else you want to put in the list. He was that guy who met Jesus on the road to Damascus and everything turned around. Do you think everywhere he went, He had this sort of amazing endorsement that everyone said, don't question Paul. He's the real deal. No, he was questioned everywhere he went. He was often coming up against opposition. It wasn't straightforward. It wasn't easy for him. He's the terrorist of the day who has the biggest turnaround ever on the road to Damascus, and everything changes. So now when he's going places, he's conscious of that. But he says, I determined to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. And I was with you in weakness and in fear and in much trembling. And my message and my preaching were not in persuasive words of wisdom, but in demonstration of the Spirit and of power. He also happens to be one of the cleverest guys around. And yet he says, I'm not going to rely on that. I'm not leaning on that. What's he really talking about? He's actually talking about the biggest problem in terms of intellect in Corinth. There were people who were basically saying, well, we've achieved a level of wisdom. We have achieved a level of understanding. And what I'm observing today is people who are basically saying, look, we've achieved a level of wisdom and a level of knowledge that we can discount this. That we can say, no, this doesn't apply anymore. No. It is not the truth. What is the greatest answer to people who are saying, no, we've got a level of earthly wisdom. We know more than you. We've studied this book. We've torn it apart. We actually have a friend of ours who used to walk with us, went on ministry trips, who has turned against Scripture, has Tipex pages out, has torn pages out of the Bible, and it breaks my heart. I've been with him in meetings like this. What's the answer? The answer is demonstration of power. It's the answer. You know, Paul said earlier on, he said, the Jews ask for signs and the Greeks search for wisdom. But we preach Christ crucified. To Jews a stumbling block and to Gentiles foolishness. Here's what Paul says. The wisdom of earth did not bring God to earth. It didn't. It doesn't matter how much wisdom we think we have to have the wisdom of heaven. And the wisdom of heaven looks like foolishness, and the wisdom of heaven looks like power. And here's the interesting thing. The wisdom of heaven, God's wisdom, is connected to mystery. That blows me away. I don't know what you think about that. How many of you have some sort of mystery in your life? Something that you don't understand. You don't understand why that happened. That person died. That person didn't get their breakthrough. I got a list of them. I want to tell you this. The good news is, if you are willing to embrace the mystery and not think that you have a right to understand the answer through the wisdom of earth, if you will embrace the mystery, you will see more breakthrough. Because it says here, we speak wisdom among those who are mature. A wisdom, however, not of this age, nor of the rulers of this age who are passing away, but we speak God's wisdom in a mystery, the hidden wisdom which God predestined for the ages to our glory. My first thing that you do here is you believe in the power of God. You expect God to show up. Whoever was leading worship earlier, when we were singing, nothing's impossible. Well done for believing that his power is still available to us today. Well done for believing that in the face of stuff we don't understand, we're not going to change the subject. We're going to press in to see the supernatural. Do you know how you do that? You stand in a place that you don't have the answers for. If you want to see more miracles in your life, stand in front of more impossible situations. That's a yum yum. Oh, good food. It's funny. If you're on GPS, sometimes I've gone on my GPS and I've quit trying to get them to tell me the church's address, and I put in yum yums, and it always comes up. It's quite funny, really. But well done. See, number one, what does this world need? This world doesn't need more wisdom. This world doesn't need more clever tales. It doesn't need more cleverly constructed speeches. We are being drowned out by words. We really are. I'm reading some things that people that I've had lunch with, had fellowship with, are writing nonsense, garbage. It's unbelievable. We're being drowned out by it. And the answer is, I didn't come with clever words. It came with a demonstration of power. We were in a meeting last week, actually. We were with Andy and Jen Cannon down in the southwest of England. We're sort of building a little bit of momentum down there, which is kind of fun. And on the middle night of the 2-day retreat, Andy and I pretty much agreed we're not going to come with anything prepared, no message, and we're just going to have worship, sit up the front and see what God does. And it's kind of fun, really. If you don't know Andy is 12 years ago, he was homeless on the streets of Liverpool. He was a drug addict, cocaine addict. He was suicidal. He was mentally ill. He was homeless. He was lost 12 years ago. And then he found Jesus. And he's pretty much the most found guy I know today. That's why I joke about it, because he sells those T-shirts, amongst other things. I love the phrase that he says, the first person he heard speak in tongues was himself. I just love that. It just makes me smile. But we were together, so we're just sitting up the front, sitting on stools, seeing what God will do. And we started praying for, particularly for anxiety. And, just had different people standing up. And it's a big issue today. There's no question about it. And it's not one of those things that when you pray for it, you're necessarily going to see the immediate answer. And the next day, a gentleman came up to me. He's probably early 70s, I would think. He said, and the other thing we were praying that people would have suddenlies. That's what we were praying for. We want to see some suddenlies, God. We want to see some, stuff that suddenly happens. And this gentleman came up to me in the next day and he said, I think I had a mini suddenly this morning. It's like, tell me. So it's just a little suddenly. I said, and then we didn't have time to share it. So I said to Andy, look, there's a guy over there. He's got something to say. I don't really know what it is, but he's got something to say. So Philip came up and he said, for the last 15 years, he's battled a whole load of illnesses, autoimmune stuff. And then in the last 5 years, it's kind of all merged together and caused him to be really, really anxious. Like, just can't do life very easily. He said, every morning I get up about an hour before my wife. I have to have a routine. I have to kick in that routine. I have to sort of settle myself for the day. I have to make sure that, everything around me is tidy and all that sort of stuff. And then I take my wife a cup of tea, which is the right thing to do. And so that's his routine. He said it's the only way he can start his day. He has to have control of his day. Otherwise, he's completely anxious. He said, well, this morning I overslept. And I completely overslept. I had an amazing night's sleep. And I just had to get up, get on with the day, took my wife a cup of tea. And he said, but something's changed. That anxiety thing, that need to control the day, it felt like something changed in me. I said to him, you told me it was a little suddenly. I think that was a big suddenly. Because that's going to change his life. And his wife's there, cheering him on and agreeing. He wants to break into every situation of our lives. He still demonstrates power. So you good with that? Yeah. See, you're a church that believes in the power of God, aren't you? Now, we also see here, and I could go to some other places, but one of the other things that's going on in our world, not just wisdom, that sort of, wisdom and speculations and all that, and we could talk about that for a long time. But we've also got people who are pretty much deconstructing our gospel. Let me read this for you out of 2 Corinthians 11. I'm afraid, lest as the serpent deceived Eve by his craftiness, your mind should be led astray from the simplicity and purity of devotion to Christ. For if one comes and preaches another Jesus whom we have not preached, or you receive a different spirit which you have not received, or a different gospel which you have not accepted, you bear this beautifully. Isn't that what's happening in our world today? We don't need a new book to be written. It's in here. But what did Paul say was the answer? I preach Christ and him crucified. I'll preach the foolishness of the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and I'm not changing the subject. And that's your second well done. Your second well done is that you preach the gospel. That you're risking and going out there, that what's happening in this region with transforming Essex, that daring to believe that Essex can be changed, that bringing in evangelists like Andy Cannon to teach you to be evangelists, to get you out on the streets. Well done. Well done for holding on to the simplicity and the purity of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Well done for holding on to the foolishness of preaching Christ and him crucified. Well done for not diluting it. Well done for saying we want to make sure that it stands out against the culture of our day. Well done. And here's what I noticed. I've been thinking as I go around churches and really encouraging churches to go after 5 things. And this one about preaching the gospel and always giving an opportunity to a response to the gospel. I've been thinking about it. Because most of the time I've been thinking that it was for the lost. But I realized it isn't. It's for all of us. See, I need to be in church every week. I need to be around people who remind me how great it is to be saved. I just do. I need to. I need Andy Cannon in my life. I do. I don't know whether I've been here since this happened, but I really can't remember. I might have been. Yeah, I have. It was in Billericay. I think it happened just before that. And I was in a meeting with Andy, and he was preaching. It was the afternoon. He was preaching. And he got to this point and he said, there's never a day of my life goes by that I don't have a tear in my eye, thankful that he saved me. And I got up, walked up, put my arm around him, interrupted. I said, I'm going to interrupt this meeting. It's a good preach, Andy, but I'm going to interrupt it. He, being a very close friend of mine, said, you're not interrupting, you're redirecting it. And I said, we need to just stop right there. Did you hear what he said? He lives every day of his life with a tear in his eye, thankful that Jesus saved him. And I, for one, that day realized I didn't. I travel. We go to South Africa next week. We're privileged. We get to go all over the place. But he really challenged me with that simple statement. I want to live every day of my life with a tear in my eye, thankful that he saved me. See, when we preach the gospel, when we give opportunity for salvation in our public meetings, we all get to be reminded, I'm saved. It changes perspective on everything. So we can so easily, can't we, get dragged down into the value system of our world, of what people have, and they have this going for them and that going for them. But there's one thing that matters above all, that he saved us. You and me. Every one of us. And it's not just for the lost. Now, incidentally, I personally think that preaching the gospel is the answer to church growth. The funny thing is, that seems quite radical in some places these days. It's like, are you sure? Yeah, it's the answer to church growth. People whose churches aren't growing need to stop and do one thing. Start preaching the gospel. It's the answer. It's so simple. But it's also the answer to me. It's the answer to all of us. So well done. Well done that you continue to preach the simplicity and purity of the gospel of Jesus Christ, that you have chosen to preach Christ crucified and to make him known. Well done. Number 3 is the presence. Now, I could go a number of places, but do you not know that your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit? What's the context of that from Paul? The context of that is to flee immorality. Now, we could go down some other roads with what happens with valuing the presence of God. Because it's also, I believe, the solution to emotional issues. Because in the presence is fullness of joy. But one of the problems in Corinth was immorality. It was probably one of the most immoral places of its time. That's why Gordon Fee says it's Los Angeles, Las Vegas, and New York all wrapped up in one place. They had a major immorality problem. They also had a weird thing which is happening in our world today. They had economic aristocracy. In other words, power in their society was disproportionate. In other words, the people who were the most powerful are the ones who had the most money. And they were making money because it was a new city that was making money. It didn't have sort of historic money, if you like. We've got that today. Because some of the people that are making the most money in our world today don't have any history. They're just people who somehow woke up one day and invented Amazon and end up with a ton of money, and they invest that money in liberal causes and immorality. But what Paul says is, flee immorality. And then 2 verses later, do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit? I remember the first time I ever heard this, and we always used to enjoy the particular speaker. I don't need to name him, but sadly he's become incredibly liberal. But he gave this brilliant illustration. The illustration was this. Imagine you borrowed, your grandmother's Rolls Royce, her prized Rolls Royce, and she lives down a road. It's a very narrow road, and on either side of the road is a sheer drop. How would you drive that Rolls Royce? You drive it very carefully, as close to the middle of the road as you possibly could, wouldn't you? Well, I definitely would. What the preacher on that occasion was saying was this. If you realized how valuable your life is, that it's the equivalent of driving your grandmother's precious Rolls Royce, or, your best friend's Porsche, or whatever you want to put in there, how would you drive it? How would you live your life? You would choose, wouldn't you, to live it and drive it as close to the middle of the road as possible. That there is a way of living that is best for us. God's not a mean God who doesn't want us to have fun. He just knows that our idea of fun's not good for us. That it doesn't work out well for us. And my observation here, because every time I come here, it feels as though your experience and your value for the presence of God increases. Apart from the fact the number of people up here increases, like you need to extend out that way just for the band. I think you're going to get a stage next time, I thought that this morning. I thought this church is going to get a stage. But you value the presence of God. And you see, when we come into the presence of God, we become aware that we are temples of the Holy Spirit. That Christ in us, the hope of glory. And it is the key, it's the answer. You see, what are the problems of our world? We've got world-based wisdom. We've got that going on. And that's a problem. We've got a level of immorality in our world. And that's a problem. We've got people deconstructing the gospel. And that's a problem. And the answers aren't complicated. They are demonstrate the power of God. They are preach the gospel of Jesus Christ. And they are value the presence of God to such an extent that we realize how precious and how valuable we are in his sight. And the price that he paid for you and I to be cleansed so that we could carry the precious Holy Spirit inside of us. And Paul wrote as well, and I've touched on it already by standing up here and holding the bread and the wine. You see, Paul's writing to the Corinthians and saying, there's arguments amongst you, there's division amongst you. You got serious problems. And that's when he goes, look, on the night Jesus was betrayed, on the night that Jesus had the massive relational problems, what did he do? He took bread and he took wine. And I would extend it out to a culture of fellowship. What did we all miss during COVID? Face-to-face relationship with brothers and sisters, didn't we? Isn't that what we missed? Oh yeah, you could get a ton of stuff on the screen, but you couldn't be next to each other. You couldn't be in the room together. You couldn't sit around a meal table and break bread or order a Domino's or whatever it is you do. And there is something about a culture of fellowship that I experience when I come here. I feel like I step into a place where people like being family. They like being in the room together. And to see you breaking bread, I was sharing this in a church recently, or in a meeting recently, and a guy came up to me and said, "We never take communion in our church." How did you get there? How did you get there? How did your church get to that place? And no wonder we end up having so many problems, because it is exactly what Sue says. It's really hard to have issues with brothers and sisters in Christ when you're holding bread and wine in your hands. And I feel like the Lord wants to say, well done. Well done for keeping fellowship and communion and family on the agenda. It's not the sideshow, it's the main event. We're the family. We're a family. The power of God, the presence of God, the preaching of the gospel of Jesus Christ, communion and fellowship. And finally, one of the things that I observe, but I don't feel it here, I observe in places this sense of entitlement. Entitlement to have a title in the church. Some sense of, oh, well, when I really make it, people will give me a title in the church. But this church doesn't do that. This church says, you're sent out there to go and make a difference out there, to be the best teacher, doctor, businessman, truck driver, waitress, nurse, mum you can possibly be. And the job of this house is to equip you to be that and to send you back out there. See, in my observation, that the answer to entitlement in the church is to empower the saints. We're ambassadors of Jesus Christ. We have been given the spirit of reconciliation. And it's not a spirit of reconciliation for in the church, it's a spirit of reconciliation for outside of the church. See, people who are constantly looking for their title, their value, and their reward by what they get told they are in church end up fighting with each other. But this house, and I've sat in this room for Transforming Essex and listened to stories of what people are doing in education and in government and as chaplains on trains and football stadiums, people in the police force. What I hear is, no. The church's role is to equip the saints to know that they're ambassadors of Jesus Christ, to carry the spirit of reconciliation with them out there. Well done, I felt like the Lord said. Well done for grabbing hold of that and carrying it. Now I'm going to close by saying something that is a little bit scary. But I do believe that this verse is true of you and is going to become even truer of you. And those are really the five main things I wanted to say well done for. But I want to close with this, because I've been locked in a verse. 2 Corinthians 12:12. The signs, it says, of a true apostle were performed among you with all perseverance by signs and wonders and miracles. You understand now why I'm a bit nervous about saying it. The signs of a true apostle. Rob's not going to stand up and say he's an apostle. But he is apostolic. Now, there's a difference. You see, apostolic is the result of coming under the influence of an apostle. And Rob has positioned himself under apostles. People like Bill Johnson and others. He's positioned himself. He's hungry. He's hungry to learn. He's hungry to know more. You see, I do believe that the signs of a true apostle are being performed among you here. Am I calling him an apostle? No, I'm not. He may be, he may not be. That's not the issue. The issue is, are the signs being performed? And I believe that what the Lord is taking you to in this house, in this family, because he's saying, well done, you're doing these things. These things are what apostles do. These things are what apostolic people do. These things are what an apostolic family do. They demonstrate power. They value the presence. They preach the gospel. They break bread and have fellowship. And they send the saints out to change the world. Are you with me? It's what this house is doing. But here's the context. The context is extraordinary. You all know this verse. I told you there are famous verses. But this is a famous verse wrapped up in something that's well known, the thorn in the flesh. Paul had a thorn in the flesh. Now, theologians can argue forever about what they think it was. But Paul chose not to tell us. It's a thorn in the flesh. And I felt like I got a beginning of a revelation about this week. See, a lot of theologians want to know what the thorn in the flesh was. It's the wrong question. And Paul wanted to make sure that we weren't preoccupied with the thorn in the flesh. Because you know what happens with thorns in the flesh? Everybody wants to tell you how to solve it. If one of you stands up here today and says, I've got this problem in the area of finance, or I've got this problem in the area of health, or I've got this problem in the area of my kids, there'll be a bunch of people who come along, you know what you should do? You know what you should do? And we end up focusing on the thorn in the flesh instead of focusing on what Paul wanted us to focus on. Now, I don't know how I apply this to this house, but there's something about this. See, what Paul says is in response, because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, for this reason, to keep me from exalting myself, there was given me a thorn in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to buffet me. I don't know how that works. You want to ask me, how's the theology of that work, that you got given a thorn in the flesh, a messenger of Satan? I don't know, okay? I don't know how that works. Like, I don't know how Job works. I don't know that either. But it's in the book. But I'm not going to get locked into trying to work out that, because I want the next bit. He has said to me, my grace is sufficient for you. For power is perfected in weakness. Most gladly, therefore, I will rather boast about my weaknesses, that the power of Christ may dwell in me. And I want to give this to you as a prophetic verse for you. You see, the signs of the true apostle have been performed among you. Now, if you carry on reading that, it says with perseverance. It's not all been easy. That's why I went here, because I knew what you said to me. You said, it's not easy. This morning, you stood out there and said, that's not easy. It's hard. I have to stay in the game. I have to keep pressing. Do you know you only need perseverance where there's resistance? It's really very simple, but it's true. You only need perseverance where there's resistance. And there's been resistance, but you persevered. You haven't quit. You haven't given up. And I feel like the Lord wants to say to you, don't try and answer the things that you don't have answers for. Don't try and tell people, we're working on this answer for that, or we're working on that. And it's a little bit tricky to link the thorn in the flesh to a church, to a ministry. But what I believe the Lord wants to say is this: my grace is sufficient for you. For power is perfected in weakness. Most gladly, therefore, I will rather boast about my weaknesses, that the power of Christ may dwell in me. And I feel like the Lord wants to really pour into you, as a family, this absolute certainty that his grace is sufficient. It's sufficient. You might sit in here and see there's a slide goes up here. You're going after 1,000 people, I believe. I like that. It's a good number. And you might look at it and go, how are we going to do that? Where are we going to get the money from? We're here in this region. There are problems here. There's an economic challenge in our world. And you might sit there and look at it and go, how? Well, he wants you, when you see that, to hear this: my grace is sufficient for you. And I believe that it's his gift to you from the well done. Because I think I've given you 5 well dones. Well done for demonstrating power. Well done for valuing the presence of God. Well done for preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ. Well done for holding bread and wine and valuing fellowship and communion. Well done for equipping the saints and sending them out to be doctors and nurses and teachers and truck drivers and waitresses. Well done for not making everything about titles in the church. And 5 well dones. And I feel like he wants to say, my grace is sufficient for you. You might have some questions. There might be some thorns in the flesh, if you like. These little disabilities, these things that get in the way, these things that maybe you discovered that Rob's not totally perfect, as a leader. You know what I'm saying? Because we all have those sort of struggles in church. And none of us are perfect. But I believe what he wants to say to you is, in this next season, you're going to be meeting with each other. You're going to say to people, his grace is sufficient. It's enough. It's enough. It's enough. Well done, Miracle House. Well done. Well done. Well done. I believe it's what the Lord's saying. I sat down, cup of tea this morning, same place I sit every morning, cup of tea, have a cup of tea. I have my coffee a bit later. I was like, what have you got? Well done.